Welcome back for episode 51 of our Music History podcast and our third and final installment talking about romantic opera. So, previously in our last few episodes, we talked about Verdi in our first one. In our last one, it was a longer one, and we talked about Wagner. We touched on Tristan and Isolde and spent a little bit of time in the second opera of the Ring cycle. Now today, enter Giacomo Puccini, the torchbearer of Italian romantic opera. His masterful compositions, characterized by short, intense vocal melodies and a keen sense of theatrical, marked the culmination of a century-long tradition. Puccini's works transcended time and place, whisking us away to exotic locales and inviting us to empathize with the struggles of vulnerable women facing hopeless situations. One such opera is Madame Butterfly, a hauntingly poignant tale derived from a play by David Belasco. Set against the backdrop of Japan's opening to trade with the United States, it reveals the tragic story of Chuchu-san, a young geisha married to the cynical Lieutenant Pinkerton, her unwavering hope for his return, and the devastating consequences that follow make for an unforgettable narrative. Within Madame Butterfly, we encounter the iconic aria Un bel dì. It transports us into Chuchu-san's fantasies, where she envisions Pinkerton's imminent return through delicate melodies and ethereal orchestration. As the aria unfolds, her hopes and dreams intertwine with heart-wrenching delusion, leaving us with an intense and emotional experience. So today, we invite you to immerse yourself in the beauty and depth of these operatic masterpieces, where music and storytelling merge to evoke a range of emotions. So, thank you and enjoy the journey ahead. So, opera continued to thrive even after the time of Wagner and Verdi, who were influential composers. The orchestra remained important, but its role changed a bit with each composer. The Romantic era's focus on intense emotions conveyed through powerful music continued to be prominent. However, these emotional moments started to become more fragmented and free-flowing in their melodies. The distinction between recitative, remember that's the spoken dialogue, and aria, the solo singing, became less clear, especially in Verdi's works. Wagner's technique, called leitmotif, where specific musical themes are associated with characters or ideas, was used by many composers because of its dramatic impact and was appreciated by both composers and audiences. But what composers and audiences began to move away from was Wagner's idea of mythical and philosophical operas. They shifted towards more realistic stories. Instead of focusing on kings, queens, gods, and heroes, they chose modern-day subjects and characters from the middle or lower class. Verdi's operas had already started moving in this direction, especially La Traviata. Late Romantic realistic operas often highlighted the darker and violent aspects of life, with the limits of the censorship of that time. The tendency was already visible in works like Rigoletto. One famous and exceptional example is Carmen, composed by Georges Bizet in 1875. It takes place in contemporary Spain and tells the story of a passionate and seductive gypsy woman who works in a cigarette factory. She captivates a soldier, causing him to abandon his fiancée and desert his regiment. However, he loses her to a carefree matador, and in a fit of jealousy, he tragically stabs her to death. This story is far removed from the mythical settings, slow-moving plots, and deep psychological exploration found in Wagner's opera Die Walküre. So Puccini became the leading Italian opera composer after Verdi, and he composed he brought an end to the great tradition of Italian romantic opera that had been started 100 years previous. Puccini's operas from around the year 1900 are still loved today because of his talent for creating short, intense vocal melodies and his skillful sense of the stage. Most of his operas show the influence of the new realistic style of late Romantic opera. However, he also found ways to soften the harsh dramatic messages from the audience. His operas are set in various locations, ranging from contemporary Japan to the American Wild West, and from Rome during Napoleon's time to ancient Beijing. Puccini used these distant and even exotic settings to present realistic stories with a touch of romance and sentimentality. Puccini became known for his focus on portraying the inner lives of vulnerable women in desperate situations. For example, there is the actress Tosca, who is forced to make a difficult choice by the chief of police in Rome in order to save her lover's life. Tosca. Then there's a poor seamstress Mimi, who's dying of tuberculosis in La Boheme. Lastly, there's the geisha Chuchu-san in Madame Butterfly, whose story we will explore. So Puccini's opera Madame Butterfly is based on a play by American author David Belasco. It tells a deeply moving and realistic story. It takes place during a time when Japan had just opened its doors to trade with the United States in the 1850s. The story revolves around a young and cynical naval officer named Lieutenant Pinkerton, who marries a naive 15-year-old geisha named Chuchu-san, whom he affectionately calls Madame Butterfly. However, Pinkerton has no intention on honoring the Japanese marriage ceremony and leaves her behind when he sails away. Despite all the evidence against it, Chuchu-san continues to hope and believe that Pinkerton will return to her. Eventually, he does come back, but he brings his real American wife along with him. This devastating news crushes Chuchu-san, who is now the mother of Pinkerton's child. Overwhelmed by despair, she tragically takes her own life. The story explores themes of love, betrayal, cultural clash, and the heartbreaking consequences of broken promises. It's a poignant and emotional tale that highlights the impact of cultural differences and the devastating effects of broken trust and unfulfilled dreams. In response to her maid's doubts, Chuchu-san, the main character of the opera, sings the most famous song called Un Bel Dì, or One Fine Day. She creates a fantasy in her mind about Pinkerton's return. She imagines that from the hills they will spot a small wisp of smoke as Pinkerton's ship appears on the horizon. She signs this beautiful vision to a melody that is memorable and dreamlike. The melody starts high in the soprano's voice and gradually descends, giving it a delicate and ethereal quality, perfectly matching the fantasy she envisions. The orchestration is gentle and delicate as well. As the aria continues, it takes on more flexible structure. Chuchu-san sings different types of music, combining full melodic sections with a style that resembles spoken dialogue, almost recitative-like declamation. However, when she reaches the moment in her fantasy where she imagines reuniting with Pinkerton, per non morire, to not die, she passionately sings her heart out, reprising the opening melody of the aria. This time the melody is louder, and the orchestra adds powerful brass instruments to intensify the emotional impact. It's a moment filled with overwhelming sadness because it portrays the growth of Chuchu-san's delusion. The melody that was initially associated with the hope of Pinkerton's ship returning now represents her joy at his return, which is merely a figment of her imagination. Puccini emphasizes the poignant nature of the scene by having the orchestra play the intensified melody once again at Chuchu-san's final words, bringing the aria to a heartfelt conclusion. So, let's check out Un Bel Dì, the aria from Act 2 of Madame Butterfly. And that brings us to the end of Romantic Opera. Told you this one would be a lot shorter. Next week, we're going to jump into the late Romantics. That will be our final 4 episodes. And we're going to look into people like Tchaikovsky and Mahler and other contemporaries of that time. So, thank you for being here. We'll see you next time. And until then, cheers.